Hello, welcome to another video from the Tradelands Nation. This is our monthly world report. This was a big month for the economy, so we start as we always do with the stock exchange. All three of our stock market indices are up as of February 29th. The M&G index closes at 24,426, up 2.5% or 633 points. This is due to the switch in seasons, taking ice off the mining tables and adding electrosteel back in. Ice just isn't able to carry the same level of demand as electrosteel, and since it hasn't been mineable for nearly 2 months, electrosteel was expected to start the month on a high note. The JSI index has benefited from the release of new ships in February, closing at 19,742, up 6.25%. This index is very close to breaking through the 20,000 doubloon barrier, although we did see it stabilize at its current price just under 20,000 once crates went off sale, so we can't say for certain that this will happen in March. And lastly, the earnings index closes at 41,364, up 199 points. This is a good sign for the index, which has been suffering from a prolonged attrition. This comes despite a decline in prices in Katanas, with the largest correction spike occurring with the new Inyolan crates being released, which added tradable crates to the game, as well as rebalancing the voucher prices, giving a significant jump into profitability for those traders. And that is a good place for us to start our next item spotlight. A few months back, a few traders who specialized in katanas and naginatas were frustrated when we called out the fragility of the pricing in their market, suggesting that high-demand items may not be holding their value, with reductions as high as 60% in discounts for katanas specifically. The release of the Inyolan crates has all but assured that this has become a truth. Items that once sold for over 120,000, for example, are now selling at an average price of just 40,000. And that is just one specific example. And while some players will argue that new weapons are not exactly the same as their old counterparts, this is really just an argument over the importance of nostalgia. If you are a new player looking to obtain your very first katana, my advice to you is not to pay attention to the difference between the older generation and the newer generation katanas, but instead focus on obtaining the best value for whatever you can afford. Which brings us to the value of item prefixes. 1 year ago, our appraisal team came together and decided to release their pricing data publicly. And as a result, we are able to project trends on these item prefixes in much the same way that we do on the price guide. The chart on the screen shows the top 10 and bottom 10 prefixes that had the most movement in the month of February. The 3 materials that gained the most were coldwood, santonite, and glass. It is worth noting that the prefix cold santonite is made up of 2 of these 3 materials, making it one of the best performers in terms of overall market value. On the low end is death metal, stellinium, and magmite, all ending with modifiers of -20% or lower. However, before you read too much into that, these also happen to be the 3 most sought after materials in the game, so discounts in value for these items can often be expected. For example, many players will list these items above their expected value and then offer discounts in order to complete a sale. So prices that see negative movement like this are often a result of players purchasing these items and then relisting them in their own shop in an effort to make a profit. And because I get asked this a lot, I actually remembered to ask this time. The data for February was based on 2,245 appraisals that were done in that time frame. Finally, we talk about the Inyolan event, which has sparked a shift in the economy of the Grand Isles. The first is the changes to mystery crates. In the past, if you wanted an item from one and you couldn't afford the Brobucks to get it, you had to buy the item inside of the crate from someone else who had opened that and then would trade it to you. Now you can trade those crates directly to other players. This means that the crates are technically more valuable when they are left unopened. The most obvious reason for this is that players have a chance of obtaining something they deem more valuable than the price they paid to purchase the crate itself. But there is a second, probably more important reason why these are a good vehicle for investment, and that is due to a very specific component of the crate's characteristics. When you open a crate and obtain an item, it has a predefined table of materials in which it draws randomly from to apply materials to that item. In the past, crates had a very specific window for when they could be opened, which was driven by the time that they were available at the premium merchant. Which means that if a specific item combination was not on that material list when that crate was available, then no item from that crate could be obtained using those materials. But based on the way that these new crates were worded, it seems that the tradable mystery crates will use whatever material list is available at the time that that player decides to open it. And now consider the following example. Consider the possibility that a year from now, titanium might be added to the materials list. They were not available as a material when the Inyolan mystery crates were on sale. But if you open one of those mystery crates in this future state when titanium is on that table, and let's say that you manage to get a katana from that crate, that means you have a chance of owning one of the only titanium katanas in the existence of the game. This is of course assuming that the wording of that crate is correct and that it won't change, and that crates aren't refreshed with new items over time. Still, this is effectively a gamble until we see just how these will work in the future, and we need to see at least a few more of these events with these tradable crates go out before we will know for sure. And secondly, there was a change to junk-rigged ships in this release, specifically to the cost of those ships. The big news of the month is the increase of the value of the Kraken voucher, which saw a tenfold increase in its value. This is because the price to obtain one at the scrap merchant has gone up, which means if you happen to get a Kraken voucher at its previous 20,000 to 25,000 asking price, now might be the right time to cash in on your investment. Inyolan ships are generally more expensive to obtain than other ships in the game. Even the two newly released ships, the Komodo and the Fang, can be considered vanity ships due to their high cost when compared to alternative options. Even the Kraken, for that matter, which has new models attached to it, which is the justification for that price hike. In addition, these remodels of the ships have given them a similar look and feel, making them feel like they are a part of a fleet of ships that were constructed from the same dockyard, instead of a hodgepodge of various elements that are loosely connected by their junk rigging. A definite move that suggests that these ships are all coming from a well-funded and highly industrialized empire, not from some faraway backwater nation. Our next topic for the month is a story. We traveled far and wide to the many inns and taverns across the Grand Isles, and in each of them we heard pieces of a story, and after putting together those pieces we have completed the puzzle, an incredible tale of an expedition that set sail from Nova Belreska. This exploratory expedition started by heading west to the land of Purshovia. Not aware that Purshovia was actually preparing an invasion of the Grand Isles, this expedition, as peaceful as its intentions really were, was instead imprisoned, accused of being a team of spies intending to sabotage the fleet that was about to set sail for Mallorca. The surviving members of this expedition mounted a daring escape, commandeering a Poseidon and fleeing northward as patrols were actively seeking them out with the intention of silencing them permanently. But as this expedition weaved their way through the various patrols, they came across a peculiar sight, a land lost to history. For as the expedition would later find out, this was the ancestral homeland of Nova Belreska, none other than the continent upon which the Republic of Belresk once stood. As the legends have been told throughout the Grand Isles by the Werner Expedition, Belresk was once home to one of the greatest trading republics in the world. The legend says that the only survivors from that nation were traders who returned one day to find the entire continent burning in a perpetual, unending fire, and it had been attacked by some foreign power, leaving nothing behind except rubble and death in its wake. But as this new expedition sets foot on this charred land, a new reality becomes clear, for it wasn't a foreign power that torched the land. It was its own people. The signs of this are the desolate but still standing villages, the lack of any evidence that there was any kind of an attack. The true cause appears to have been a disease that ravaged the entire land swiftly and completely. The people of the Republic, realizing that this was probably their last moments, in a last-ditch effort to save those who were not yet infected, scorched the earth to slow the disease's advance, allowing time for others who were not infected to escape. And as the great cities emptied, knowing it was also going to be their last moments, the men and women worked day and night across their many shipyards, constructing a fleet of massive ships, the arks of their civilization, to carry those survivors of their lost nation. And mere hours after the last ship set sail, the docks would also be in flames, the perpetual fire that is said to rage across that continent forever, so that the disease may never spread beyond the borders of the once great empire. And many of us will actually have one of these great ships in our inventory. Today we know them as the Atlas, long believed to just be a bulky and ancient trade ship from a bygone era. Today, we now know that they have a different meaning. They were the vessels that bore the last hope of a once great nation. Their continued utility is a testament to their great workmanship and ingenuity. And thinking back through the history of the Grand Isles, we have long believed that there was only one ship from this exodus that actually survived. These people are known today as the Novan Expedition, which crashed on the rocks of Halengard, and through these people's hard work and endurance, they would create a new society. And today, we know that group by a new name, Nova Balreska, a city-state of the Grand Isles, known as a powerful and wealthy nation who has achieved recognition as a proud society that is capable of achieving great things beyond what anyone can dream. And if you are a member of Nova Balreska, then I encourage you to stand proud and fly the crimson flag atop your tallest mast, as the White Cross reminds the world that Nova Balreska is the crowning achievement of a nation that sacrificed everything it has, a legacy that should never be forgotten. And now, today, with this new revelation, it brings up more questions that need answers. For in the journal that was discovered from this expedition, the last page was written in a foreign and very cryptic language unfamiliar to the Grand Isles. Could it be that there's actually another group that survived that exodus from Balresk? Does that mean that Nova Balreska is not alone in this world? And most important of all, could there actually be a cure to this disease? Whether by pure coincidence or by fate, the current chancellor of Nova Balreska is none other than Dr. Didgeridoo, the one man on the entire planet who might be capable of curing this disease, and he is in charge of Nova. But to do it, he will need your help from all of you, the players of Tradelands, and it starts with this one question. Have you seen this man? We only know him by his first initial, P, and of course his nickname known as the Crying Man. He is said to have been the only one who knows the true fate of that expedition, and he was last seen here on the southern dock of Nova Balreska. My ask of you is to find him and learn whatever he knows, and provide all of your findings to the Doctor of Nova Balreska to help him determine if this is a moment when the children of Nova Balreska can become the caretakers of their ancestral homeland. And it doesn't matter if the flag that you fly is white, red, or even black. Anyone can be a part of solving what might be the greatest puzzle in all of Tradelands history. And while we wait to see what happens with that, the more immediate impact of that expedition has to do with Purshovia. After not hearing any word back from the expedition after they had arrived in Purshovian waters, Nova dispatched 7th Recon to retrace the steps of the expedition, and here they came across the Purshovian war fleet that was headed to Mallorca. They successfully reported this engagement to Nova and a newly constituted allied force. Admiral Alicat, which was currently the leader of this force, took this opportunity to execute the plan of defense the Allies had been working on for the past 6 months, and this was known as Operation Velvet Paw. The first phase of this would be a preemptive strike on Purshovian territory, meant to divert whatever force was being sent to the Grand Isles, and to allow the Allies to keep the initiative for the duration of the conflict, something that had worked well for them in the previous war. And it was now that the Allied commanders unveiled their new secret weapon. In a secret chamber underneath the Verdantine Brassworks, a special forces team known as the Hammers were training. learning how to quickly and efficiently disable an enemy manufactory, while allowing it to be easily rebuilt if that manufactory were ever to be captured. The Hammers was made up of 4 elite Special Forces members from Whitecrest, and a regiment of the former Verdantine tradesmen who had been integrated into the Nova Balrescan Navy. The target of Phase 1 of Velvet Paw was Lycie. Here, Admiral Alicat led a joint force of Nova's 2nd Marines and the Whitecrest 2nd Detached Amphibious Strike Force. This force would assault the fortress, bottling up the majority of the Purshovian local garrison while the hammer would fall on the town. Despite the attack on the fort being an obvious feint, the fighting was fierce, and eventually they did discover a backdoor entrance to the fort, which made the Allies believe they might be able to take the fortress on their first attempt. However, they would not be able to move a significant number of troops through this back entrance. They would have to go through the main entrance. This was the only way to enter the first layer of defenses, which caused a bottleneck that proved too strong for the Allied forces to overrun. Back in the city, the small local police forces would track down the infiltrators and began eliminating them one by one in house-to-house small arms fighting. Despite the desperation of the situation, the fighting in town would have light casualties on both sides. That is, until the Allied forces ultimately decided to withdraw. The goal of this operation had been accomplished. The Lycian steelworks were effectively sabotaged, completely stopping the production of Lycian steel for Purshovia in the short term. And that also meant that this island was now useless to Purshovia in the near term as well. That's because of the second important outcome of this battle, and that was the intelligence obtained by the Allied forces. The Allies now know that the fortress on this island was actually incomplete, relying on the production of local Lycian steel in order to complete it. This multi-tiered structure was high enough that if cannons were effectively mounted inside of the fort, no hostile navy would be able to even come within mortar distance of the island without experiencing extreme casualties. But it was incomplete, and Purshovia was relying on the local Lycian steelworks factory in order to complete its construction. The devs of Purshovia would not be able to complete the build buttons that would have allowed the defenders to construct cannons in the fort, meaning the garrison on the island was doomed if it was assaulted again by a large Allied force, or if it wasn't relieved by a large Purshovian navy. It seemed that Operation Velvet Paw had successfully done its part, but unbeknownst to the Allies at the time, like an elaborate game of chess, Purshovia had created a fleet that was meant to act as a direct counter to the Allied forces that were operating in the Grand Isles. They called themselves the 303, based on their task force registry number, which was the 303rd Fleet, showcasing a new decentralized command structure that they were implementing specifically to overcome a tactical deficiency which they had identified as a glaring issue in the last war. It was a product of 9 months of planning and forming to ensure that they would be successful in this round of the war, and leading it was a new vice admiral. And because Purshovian names are sometimes nigh unpronounceable, he is simply known to the Allies as Admiral Spirit. He ignored the attack on the inconsequential and incomplete Lycian fort, and he continued his way to Mallorca. And here, the joint Third Fleet, made up of contingents of ships that were both previously stationed at Salem and at Carronade Key, they took up defensive positions, while converted trade ships began to evacuate the civilian population on the island. And unfortunately, the defense of the island would not prove to be a success. Admiral Spirit outmaneuvered the defense forces, who were more intent on protecting those civilian ships that were evacuating civilians. And in what would seem to be so unrealistic, almost mythical in its level of absurdity, the defenders on Mallorca would later claim that Purshovia had actually attacked with flying ships. Indeed, our own footage seems to show Purshovians literally falling out of the sky, overrunning confused defenders from behind instead of trying to form a front line. And for a nation that seems to be able to invent great new war machines simply on the fly, we actually can't rule out the existence of airships at this battle. And while this battle would ultimately be seen as a retreat for the Allies, One positive they were able to take from it was the complete lack of civilian casualties, a sign of success in their efforts as the fleet pulled back to friendly waters. And finally, seeing that the fleet was not going to divert to Lycie, Admiral Alicat regrouped and enacted Phase 2 of Operation Velvet Paw well ahead of schedule. And he took that fortress island with ease. With the intelligence gathered during the earlier raid, the Allies knew that the fortress posed no threat to their ships. Therefore, they sent in their heaviest mortar ships to cover a methodical house-to-house sweep of the lower island, before exploiting the breach discovered by the 2nd Amphibious Force in the first attack. They encircled the defenders on the lower ramparts of the fort, leaving the completely surrounded defenders in the upper fort to surrender without putting up any resistance. As they did their victory lap, the question now was if the Allies could continue to expand their claw further into Purshovian territory, or they should start focusing their attention to the south and on building up the defenses. And while that step will have to wait until next month, the final item that occurred was literally at the 11th hour of the last day of February, was another important event, and this time it occurred in the east. The details of what happened are still highly classified by all sides, and so there will likely be more information revealed as time goes on. But what we know so far is that there was a diplomatic incident, one in which an Inyolan warship apparently stole a Birkeland warship and later tried to sink a Whitecrest ship that was conducting search and rescue operations for that Birkeland warship. And this has led to an all-out war in the east. Whitecrest is now asking for you to aid them in the defense of the Grand Isles, pointing out that if Inyola was to somehow win this war, then all of us who own Inyolan ships, crates, or weapons will likely have them confiscated by this kingdom in the east. Already their eyes seem to be focusing towards interrogating the scrap dealer on Harrisburg. And for those of us who had dealings with that scrap merchant, we may now find ourselves on a new hit list from Inyola. So watch your back if you are making your way to the eastern seas. And that will do it for this month's report. Tradelands is certainly on an incredible journey, so thank you all for watching, and be safe out there while you all trade.